Welcome to the Future Thinkers podcast. I'm Mike Gilliland.
And I'm Yulia Ivanova. And this podcast is all about the future.
Hey guys, welcome to episode number 32 of the Future Thinkers podcast. So today our guest is Aric Dromi. He's a speaker and digital philosopher at Tempus Motu, and he also happens to be the futurologist at Volvo cars. So this was a really interesting conversation about future cities, blockchain, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. We covered a lot of different subjects, and I think you guys are going to find it pretty interesting.
And as always, before we get into the show, I want to say thank you to all of our recent patrons and donors. Nelson, Josiah, Nick, Eric, and Jack. Thank you guys for supporting the show. And for everybody else listening, if you want to help us make more podcasts and videos and make the show better, you can go to patreon.com/futurethinkers and become a patron. We also have a couple of announcements to make. We recently did a soft launch of our meditation app with Vinay Gupta. You can check that out by going to futurethinkers.org/meditation-app.
I also wrote a pretty heavy article about my experiences with meditation and going and battling through depression and a lot of crazy events that happened in the span of a couple of years. So you can read that by going to futurethinkers.org/monkey.
Also, we are currently working on building a startup incubator and innovation lab here in Plovdiv. It's been really exciting. We've attracted a lot of people who are really interested in working with us on it. We've even tentatively found a building and some investors, but we will talk about it in more detail in future episodes. But for now, you can go to futurethinkers.org/incubator to read our summary and intention of what we're planning to do. And one last thing, if you want to get the show notes for any of the mentions or links from this episode, you can go to futurethinkers.org/32. Let's get into it.
Aric, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Hey guys, great to be here.
So today we're talking a bit about smart cities. We've connected with you in the past and had some interesting conversations about visioning the future, especially as it relates to where we're currently living, which is Plovdiv, Bulgaria. But I'm interested to hear your perspective on what you think a future city looks like.
I'm not sure the future city is actually a city at all. I'm more and more realizing the in-migration that we're experiencing right now. The half of the world population lives in the cities, and the expectations is to go beyond 75% of the world population even in the cities in the next few years. But there's an interesting evolution of lab technologies that will find themselves into the mass market, from AI to biotech to neuroscience. The rise of mixed reality or virtual reality landscape will eventually eliminate our needs to go from physically to move from one place to another. You don't really need to live in the city once you can, plug yourself into a pod and appear in another reality. It's extremely philosophical questions if there is actually a future to a city. I think cities is the oldest society structure that we know. Nation came way after that. With that being said, we have been moved to live in the cities after the industrial revolutions. And by that time, our human values were already shaped. And they were shaped as farmers. We were living in the farms. And that is what we carry into the city. And I think it's going to end up as a circle, that the future cities are going to be scattered and they will be much more digital than actually physical.
We've seen that a lot, actually, in little micro movements with the digital nomad community.
Yeah.
These people who no longer have to work from a specific location, so they can go anywhere in the world and work. I definitely see less pull to be in the city. Then again, the size of the city and what you need changes when you can work online. It'll probably change a lot more in virtual reality, too. I'm curious as to know what online workers are going to want and need out of their city when they're using virtual reality to do their digital commute.
I believe in the future of city mayors, as they are the decision makers on the day-to-day life of citizens. The government has no clue what's going on in my day-to-day life. When cities start to think as Fortune 500 and not as a governmental municipality, we will start to see this change actually occurring. If you look at any Fortune 500 company, you cannot really pinpoint an exact location of the company. To be honest, none of the current Fortune 500 companies are capable to sustain their existence if they will be chained to their physical location. So they need to expand beyond the physical geographic borders and position themselves in multiple locations. Now, technologies such as AI and VR will enable cities to create digital citizenship models, which by default will recreate GDP structures. And I like the idea of digital nomads, of being able to work from anywhere you would like to work in the world. But you will be able to be part of any city using your digital representation, regardless of where your organic matter resides. When that will happen, then we are going to see a massive change in the way cities are being structured, in the size of the cities, in the abilities of the city to create a whole new holistic infrastructure for its citizens.
How do you think the physical structure of the cities will be different in 5 years and 10 years?
If you take any city from a bird's-eye view, you see that on average, 75% of a city today, it's roads and parking lots. It's 75%. More and more people right now want to live in the cities, and the cities has a certain capacity of upscaling or cross-scaling to accommodate the needs of the people that migrate into the city. So to start with, we will start to see new economical and business models that cities are going to run upon. Second, we will see a set of rules. Some people will say taking the freedom out of the cities. The citizens, I would say, they're actually giving more freedoms. Let's look at mobility for a change. The idea of autonomous driving cars, robotic cars, will eliminate the need for ownership in the cities. Oslo, Helsinki, Amsterdam already are looking into forbidden manual-driven cars within city centers. Once you do that, you take away certain percentages of a need for such an infrastructure, so you can literally start redesign or repurpose these spaces in a whole new way. I think that's the first step in the near future that we are going to see. Unfortunately, most governments today are anchored in paper-based democracy that don't see beyond the next 2 years. But I do see a lot of hope within corporations such as Google, Apple, Facebook, and other giant corporations, Uber or Airbnb, stepping in and literally buying certain properties in the cities in order to digitalize the interaction models within these areas. In the short term, it's going to be a little bit chaotic. It's going to be a little bit confusing. Probably new generations of politicians will need to take the stage. But in the long run, no need to actually own a car in the city to go from one place to another. Uber, Google, Airbus, already looking at the space above the roads. All of them are looking into from flying cars to autonomous drones to autonomous taxis by Airbus that will enable to move people longer distance in mega cities. Just the mobility change will force a massive reshuffle of resources in the city, which will affect energy and communication accordingly.
How do you think blockchain will play into this?
I think the only way for blockchain to play into this is if Smart City Mayor will decide that this is the infrastructure that is going to monetize the data the city is actually generating. When I'm looking at businesses today, I don't ask what's your product or how many people work for you. I simply ask how many lines of code makes your business. And those cities that will think in these terms and will use blockchain in order to facilitate the data interactions within the city will have a whole new supply chain that can scale the city beyond any other city that exists. It will literally become a Fortune 500 city. For me, we are fast moving from information-driven internet to a value-driven internet or experience-driven internet. The current infrastructure will not be able to hold the values that it needs to hold. And blockchain is not a technology, it's a philosophical abstract of an idea. Once a city implements that, they will rule the world.
Yeah, interesting. I've never heard it referred to as an idea or a methodology than a technology, but it's totally true. It's not like the technology itself is that complicated or revolutionary. It's what it allows for. I'm interested to know your perspective on whether you think existing cities can kind of retrofit and change and adapt to this type of future city you're describing, or if you think the opportunity is going to be contained more in creating new cities from the ground up.
I just read a few weeks ago that the US legislation is slowly under the rug starting to pull some rules that will restrict autonomous driving cars of going on the roads in the cities, because they don't have the money to fit the infrastructure to accommodate the need of an autonomous driving car. I gave an interview a few months back to UK magazine, and I say if London is not going to be careful, they're going to end up a third world city 10 years from now. And that's my view on all major cities in Europe and on the developed world. I think the potentials of really building a city that is sustainable and can accommodate society future needs is in the places like Africa, places like South America, places that has shit for infrastructure, and they don't need to retrofit legacy systems. Unfortunately, when the cities we live in today were designed so many years ago, they were designed under the influence of industrial revolution. There is a great book called The Second Machine Age, which defining it's we're about to experience what machines have done to our bodies, what digital can do to our brains, and I don't think cities their current infrastructure is not fit to handle these changes. But places such as Africa, which they really don't have any infrastructure right now, but they have more mobile phones than sanitary toilets. It's so much more easy to deploy and build a sustainable infrastructure that is based on and grounded in digital frameworks. China, for example, is building this, they call it ghost cities, but if you look under the ground, you understand that they are all connected. They're using connectivity as one of the infrastructures that they're building the cities upon. Outside of Manila, they build a whole new business process city that is based on connectivity. And they slowly took over India when it's come to support centers. It's these cities that think like that who will be able to survive the change. In Europe, I can point only on one city that is able to do that, and that's Berlin.
Why do you think Berlin is different?
I think the leadership in Berlin is actually listening to the digital nomads. They are trying to learn from them. They're using them as a model. These are the changes that are happening. You can see that the educational layout in Berlin is fitting itself to the changes that is happening today.
What about places like Estonia?
I will include Estonia in one of these, Estonia and Singapore alongside, right? They are one of these places that can very much shine a light on how things should be done. Estonia, after all, created the first digital citizenship model. I do think they created it in the wrong way, with the wrong set of tools, but they had the balls and the guts to create it, and all the respect goes to that. And now I want them to be smart enough to evolve their entire governance model alongside the model they have created.
And Singapore?
If you look at Singapore, there are only two things that you can fully immerse yourself when you're going into. The first thing is a car, right? The car is a computer today, and it's the only computer you can sit inside, that you can literally put your entire sensory data. And then we don't have 5 senses, we have between 14 and 21 senses. Singapore is like a car. When you step into Singapore, you're immersing yourself in amount of sensors that read every single data point that you generate. And the city is able to capitalize and monetize that it's amazing. So it's a really great model of using a physical structure to digitalize the data that is generating.
Can you talk a bit more about that? How are they using the data?
The simple thing of be able to understand traffic behavior, traffic patterns in Singapore. London is spending around £4.4 billion on congestions every year. Even so, they have more cameras than any other place on the planet. They're not able to adjust the right algorithms to understand traffic behavior in the city in order to reduce congestions. And only 3% is a hell of a lot of money. While in Singapore, they are smartly analyzing traffic data just to understand how many people are going to be on a certain street and for how long the congestion is going to last in order to deploy the right resources to ease the congestion. They can understand behavioral buying patterns by seeing how many people are going to a specific store. The simple things they're able to do. But if you look deep down, they're able to understand how many lonely people they have in the city, how many old people that no one visits they have in the cities, just by capturing human data.
Can you talk about cities like Plovdiv, ones that are sort of middle of the road, not overly technologically advanced, but maybe are perhaps more open to this sort of retrofitting and changing?
You're touching a very interesting nerve, because you both know that Plovdiv is one of my most favorite cities on the planet. And Plovdiv, as being part of Bulgaria, is one of the most unbranded potentials in Europe today. I like the comparisons of being in Plovdiv is like walking around a 1920s USA version of possibilities. There is a great promise and a great talent that Plovdiv holds if just people will be able to realize it. It's one of these places that the infrastructure is so old that you don't have to patch it and upgrade it like other cities. So you do have all of the layout in front of you to start from scratch and really create digital society.
What makes cities like it different in that it has so much opportunity on the technological side?
No one ever cared about this city for years and years. It got stuck in an era that predated the capitalistic changes that happened to the rest of the cities today, right? No one put new roads so they can increase the amount of cars in the city. So you don't have the amount of congestions you get in other places. It's easier to convert roads to autonomous driving roads and deploy autonomous driving cars and fit the sidewalks in order to support that. One of the best internet connections in the world, so the city already carries connectivity as its backbone. So to come and implement, for example, blockchain as a payment methods or data capturing methods to deploy sensors on top of blockchain is extremely easy in that city because there is nothing else there. You don't need to patch, you don't need to replace, it's just virgin.
And I guess it's not too big. So in terms of infrastructure, for example, in a city like London, it's extremely big and complex, and there's layers and layers of different ages of infrastructure. Whereas in Plovdiv, it's small enough that if you wanted to replace all of the infrastructure in the whole city, you actually could do it.
And it will be fast and easy. And when you just walk around Plovdiv and talk to people, you see that the people will really welcome that one. Plovdiv is already one of the cities that created dark GDP structure. So you have a lot of street merchants that are actually selling you physical things, but they're using digital means in order to collect the payment. And the payment doesn't run through the normal banking system. They're using Etsy and PayPal to complete the payment systems. So you can actually capture that and fold that. It's not done today, but the city has the potential of doing that. I'm hunting a lot of stuff, secondhand things on Etsy quite often. And I'm surprised of the amount of merchants I actually find in Plovdiv that shipping me things, which is quite impressive if you think about, people say Bulgaria is the poorest country in the EU. Well, their GDP, their real GDP is richer than a lot of any other countries in the EU right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think the GDP of so many countries these days is made up of income from financial instruments that has no real production value. It's just numbers being shuffled around. Whereas in Bulgaria, when you look at it on paper, it's poor, but when you come here and see all of it, you see how rich it really is in terms of the culture and the food. And when you come out on the street, people are always sitting at coffee shops and they're buying stuff at shops. There's so much activity.
I'm pretty sure it was John F. Kennedy that complained about the fact that it's very easy for us to capture the physical elements of our society and calculate our GDP upon that, but we don't include the level of education the population is getting, or their happiness, or their health. And I think it's easier to do these things and to see these things and fold them in a place like Bulgaria and Plovdiv in particular, because people jumped over a certain stage that the rest of Europe got hung on.
Say digital nomads want to find a new city or a city to invest in long term. What are the kind of checkmark boxes they're going to look for in terms of investment opportunity for creating an alpha future city like you imagine?
Well, number one, we look at the infrastructure. I think this is one of the most important things for a digital nomad community to have if they would like to establish some kind of a structure in that city. And that infrastructure needs to be, part of the city DNA, and that's connectivity. And on top of that, there should be free vertical platforms that's running or rising from that infrastructure, which is energy, mobility, and communication. Once you have that established, any digital nomad community can establish, basically design and build any structures or any ecosystem they would like on top of that.
So how do you envision those things being fulfilled in Plovdiv?
Well, we do have the beginning of the infrastructure. Like we said, it's one of the best internets around the world, but it needs to be anchored and it needs to become a commodity in that city, or at least in certain areas of the city, it needs to become a commodity. So a company needs to step in and make it so. The second part is you really need some kind of an attraction for a specific set of digital nomads. And I think when we talked about, I think Plovdiv will be one hell of a place to try out blockchain business models. And again, I'm caring less about cryptocurrency running on blockchains because the potential is so much bigger than that. And as I do believe that blockchain should be the infrastructure for any mixed reality landscape outside there in order to monetize it, I would focus on blockchain and mixed reality technologies in order to facilitate the first wave of digital nomads into that city.
Actually, that's a really interesting point. We've talked a lot about augmented reality and implementing sort of a digital layer over cities. Can you talk a bit about that and how you envision that being more practical for people on a day-to-day use?
Let's look at education to start with. I've seen small implementations of interesting VR environments, but no one actually went beyond of the minimum games. I have 4 kids. All of them has a computer, iPad, and the school says, "Yeah, look at us. We are very, very advanced. We gave all of our students iPads." But you haven't taught them how to be curious, and you haven't taught them how to explore. The Google Book Project is scanning all of the books around the world, and then they're giving me a piece of glass in my hand and says, "Hey, look, you can access all of the books in the world." Great. I cannot read all of the books in the world. We don't read faster as in the days of Aristo. We actually read 2 pages a minute. So if you read for your entire life 2 pages a minute, how many books you're going to cover? Not even a fractions of 1% of the books that exist out there. So it doesn't really help me that, I have access to all of the books around the world if I don't know how to find what I need, or I'm not curious enough to explore and to go into the deep places that, my mind attract me to. And technologies like VR and AI can really open a whole new set of education potentials. I have the HoloLens at home, and I played a lot with the HoloLens, and I gave my kids the world tour of Rome through the HoloLens experience. And they stood in the middle of the living room, and they were gone for half an hour, and you can see the expressions and the body language. And once it finished, me and my wife says, "What do you think? Should we go for that city for a vacation?" And the comment was like, "But we have just been there." And the second question is like, what other cities can we see now? So we gave them Machu Picchu, but this is the only 2 things that they can do right now. The idea is that you can really boost kids' curiosity to go and explore beyond the limitations of the physical school that they reside in. And this is just, the beginning of how you can expand the city borders, expand the knowledge of the kids. You can use AI technologies to capture pieces of data that our conscious mind is not able to process. Our brain is not capable of handling big data. It's not our subconscious, it's our awareness. We are not able to process more than that. Technologies like AI and VR will literally help you to expand beyond them, to understand more of the world that you're living in. And that is what needs to be tackled first when it comes to education systems.
I studied audio when I was in college, and I was really surprised to hear how much of the audio spectrum the human being can actually see or hear. And it's the same thing with sight too. We just have this tiny, narrow bandwidth of sight. There's so much more information happening outside of that. So I think that could be a really interesting element, is seeing all these new layers of information through augmented reality and virtual reality.
And also using AI to process information for you and present it to you in a way that you can understand and grasp.
Yeah.
Because like you're saying, with all inputs coming in, we're simply not able to understand it or process it.
There are 2 parallel tracks when people talk about AI. So I never saw AI as a technology, but more as a philosophical idea that contains different types of technologies under it, such as machine learning, deep learning, cognitive science, and so on. There is the discipline that says let's develop an AI as a standalone entity, and there is the discipline says we should become our own AI, meaning we are the AI. We can use a technology to really enhance our intelligent capabilities into digital spaces. And I'm fascinated by that track because, like you said, it can expose us to so many ideas that we are not able to see right now. So when we talked before these conversations, we talked about your meditation app. EEG technology is pretty much advanced today. You can buy for $100, you can buy a EEG receiver and visualize your brainwave on a 2D screens. Now, imagine if we can take that and put yourself inside your brainwaves through a VR technology.
Oh, yeah. That's like a next level of biofeedback.
Exactly. Think about putting a city planner inside rush hour. architect inside buildings that doesn't exist yet.
Back to this artificial intelligence interpreting the data, especially if it's interpreting the brainwave data. Like I could see trip sitter applications if you're doing psychedelics, or I could see meditation guides where if you're getting off target or like following a thought, then you would have some sort of visual reminder that wasn't just the brainwaves, like the AI could interpret your brainwaves.
And if you think that is insane, wait until ECOG machines will be sophisticated enough, you will be able to experience your own dreams through a VR.
What is an ECOG machine?
Well, it's the machines that enable to take your brainwaves and make a picture out of it. So right now, they are completely not accurate. They are massive, but, Moore's law and computation power have proven us that in a few years' time, everything will be small and in your pocket.
Oh, yeah, this is so interesting. How can we use this kind of technology to interact with our environments? Because right now, the way that cities are designed, they are not always friendly to us. How can we use this kind of AI technology to make cities extension of ourselves rather than separate from us?
Let's go back and talk a little bit about blockchain and the idea that every block in the chain knows what every other block knows. So it's the notions of swarm intelligence that you can look at, ant farms or beehives. Everyone knows what everyone knows at every given moment. Let's talk about the evolutions of some technologies that is happening around. I like to call it body parts, but you can already modify your organic structure with silicon enforcement, with these things that, everyone's talking about the Internet of Things, but, imagine that you have prosthetic limb that is connected to the internet and can attract sensor data, react to sensor data that's coming from a building or from a shop. You can take all of these ones. You can really create a biofeedback loop like never before, which is a mix between brain to brain to physical.
A lot of people say that artificial intelligence is something we're really far off on, or we may never ever get to. But this idea that we become our own artificial intelligence and we just give ourselves more sensory data to work with and process, allowing us to reach new levels of intelligence and awareness around us. I think this idea is really interesting. We've already kind of been doing it. Like, remember one of our old roommates had the magnets surgically implanted into her fingertips, and she said it just became a normal thing. Like, you could feel magnetic fields around you, and it just became something like an extra sense that the brain just automatically processed.
What if we had this external brain that could also process data for us and then feed the kind of finished processed few bits of data, like a simple model, back to our biological brain, which
like
would perceive it?
Like your own big data generating system. Like, you are the big data generating the big data at all times, and you've got a Siri that can then interpret that data on request.
I like this concept by a company called Maya Design in the US that illustrated that it's not more information in computers, it's people in the information. And I think we already passed the stage. We are a piece of an information machine. Computers has eyes and ears. Companies like Crystal Nose can capture any digital footprint I left behind and create an emotional abstract of who I am, the things that makes me tick. Even if it's 75% accurate right now, for that algorithm is fantastic. Algorithms can analyze my posts that are right behind and copy my way of writing and process it through flow machines and publish articles on behalf of my name, probably even better because they're able to connect to places I cannot even connect to. So 6 degrees of separation that Stanley Milgram created doesn't really exist anymore within the digital space. It's one click. And you can see I love to follow flow machines that you give them the Beatles and says, okay, play that songs in a reggae styles. And it's not bad. We are literally part of that system, of that information that exists all around. We are generating footprints whenever we go, digital footprints, and computer can see, can hear, can process. So it still happens in silo. There is still not an integrations between my brain and what computers are able to do. But if you see the breakthrough that happened with connecting my brains and bypassing nerve damage in order to regain, muscle control, you can take that way beyond these applications and literally use my brain, to create a Harry Potter life. I love the Harry Potter, moving buildings? Why not have a disposable reality that reacts according to your needs? And you have all of the blueprints of the materials from nanotubes and graphenes to D2. It's all out there. I think it's also an issue of cultural behavior changes that we need to capture right now. Are we actually ready to have these changes happening? Me, hell yeah, of course. I already live there every time I close my eyes. One of the things that I'm afraid of most, and one of the things that most likely will happen, we will see digital cities alongside analog cities and different type of citizens living in these cities. The reason I'm afraid of it is because, it's just going to create the same model that we have today, development countries versus rest of the world. And I really hope we don't need to go through that. I would think that every city needs to start these small steps to accommodate digital citizens and digital transformation needs within its own self, rather than having digital nomads or young people escaping that cities in favor of another city.
Yeah, I never thought that with such big hubs, big cities like New York or London, that one day they could be competing and struggling to compete with smaller cities and technologically advanced cities in Africa or something. But it's already happening in Asia now.
Absolutely. Like we talked about Estonia before, right? Take Estonia versus any other place in Europe. No one was able to predict that and to see that one's coming. So yes, and this is where I'm talking about culture, that we are still governed by baby boomers. And I think for me, the best things the baby boomers have done is to give birth for the X generations. But thank you have done that. Move away, let the X generation come in and pave the way for the Y generations. And the Y generation is confused by it and they are not the future. They are 30 years old. I render them irrelevant. I know you guys are Y generations, you are young, but it's the new alphas that needs to make something out of this future. I see a massive generation cultural gap between digital nomads and the current farts that are running the world. Sorry to say, I stayed awake 2 nights ago just to watch the debates between Hillary and Trump, and it became very, very clear to me, it's genius. It's absolutely genius. They finally found a way to monetize idiocracy. Come on, we can do better than that as a society. The current generations is taking care of the current generations. And I think I published an article a few months back called the Da Vinci Gap, and the idea of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Larry Ellison and all of these giants that started these trends, they never created the generations to fill in the gap after they left, and now they're gone. So not all of them are dead, but they're certainly gone. They're not leading anyway. And then you get a new generations that I often says that instead of reading the books, they have seen the movies. And I'm sorry, it's not the same. So we don't have any assertive leadership that can actually take us to the next needed stage. And this is my fear. This is the culture fear I have right now, that we have all of the tools, we have all of the pieces of the puzzle, but we have a blind leadership that is forcing us to sleep through the most important changes humanity have ever seen.
Do you think there's leadership missing in the younger generations?
Yeah, because we taught them they can do whatever they want. We never taught them to be leaders.
Yeah, especially thought leadership that's missing.
Since we started traveling, I never would have guessed that I'd have more in common with people my age all over the world than I would with my parents' generation.
This scares me. And that's why it's so important to for me, it always starts from education. I'm having a chat with a group of people in Russia, and we're talking about education. And one of my points that it should be mandatory to have in school systems 2 hours a week lessons on how to fail. Because we are teaching kids that, failure is the opposite of success. It's not. It's its trigger. Doing nothing is the opposite of success. My kids, it's like from 15 to 11. They don't teach them how to fail. But by doing that, they are not pushing them beyond of their potentials. So they are just floating through the system instead of excelling the system, instead of designing and repurposing the system. Larry Ellison, Bill Gates, they repurpose the system according to their needs. Who has guts or courage to do that today?
It's amazing the amount of information this generation has had to learn compared to the older generation. And yet you're right, there's no leadership.
I just finished a book by Todd Rose called The End of Average. It's by far coming into the top 5 books I've ever read. And I like the idea that, our education system is constantly measuring kids against the average. You're above average or below average. But in reality, average doesn't really exist. It simply doesn't exist. It's a one-dimensional thinking. They can never succeed of anything if we're telling them you can do whatever you want to do. No, you need to do what you're best of doing. And for fuck the rest. And so read this book. It's one of the absolutely genius books I've ever read.
Some of the people who are currently in leadership roles, especially in governments, especially people who are leading cities, are in this older generation. So what does leadership of the future look like when it comes to leading a city?
I think that cities should be led by an AI in the future.
Good one.
Seriously, no, look at it. Cities is a combination of impossible changes, right? Let's take Google Go algorithm and let's have an experiment. Let it run a city for 1 month. Let it coordinate traffic and food deliveries and, mobility and public transportation for 1 month. Trust me, it will do better than any other engineer on the planet today.
Do you think there's a lead-up point with decentralized governance before an AI governance happens? Or do you think that's too difficult and there's going to be too much resistance?
Or can they work in parallel?
They can work in parallel. I think one of the first countries you can actually implement that one is Canada, the new Prime Minister Trudeau. I think he is in the right age to understand that pop stars is not the only thing you need to govern. It wasn't his quantum physics quotes. It's some of his other speeches that indicates that he can actually govern in parallel to an AI. He can get advice from an AI. He will be able to understand the true value of experimenting something like that. So, Mike, you're Canadian, so you can offer that to him.
Email, hey, yo, Justin, you should try this thing. So what is the role of humans in leadership in the future? If AI is making, let's say, most of these quantitative decisions, do humans actually have anything to offer?
As we said before, I don't think an AI is a standalone thing. I think it's an extension of us. It enables us to expand our potential beyond our organic matter. So I think when I say the city needs to be governed by an AI, it needs to be governed by a human that is extending his potential through an AI infrastructure or AI services. I think humans, as we know them today, will cease to exist in the future. And eventually we will descend from organic matter into, I will not call it silicon, but a new generations of materials. There is always the philosophical debate, what happened to the soul and the consciousness, and can we actually literally transcend? I believe we can. And I think, we tend to see an AI, we tend to look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? We think that's an AI. But I see more AI as, as the Red Queen and her child. If you take the concept of the movie Hair and you take the concept of Resident Evil of the Red Queen and you marry them and you put a child together and you use that as an extension of human being, that's where at least my line of thinking is going. We don't need to teach an AI everything from scratch. We carry a DNA signature within us that makes us who we are, curious and passionate. And there is a certain type of values that we can mirror into technology around us, so we can refer to it as mirrored intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. But it can start acting on behalf of our name and extend us and make us into, a fragmented being. And each fragment of us can interact with other fragments of other human beings. And you end up in this more intelligent type of structure. And I think that's the true transcendence.
That's like decentralized intelligence, kind of.
Yeah.
I have one more practical question for you. What can leaders in cities, what should they be open to that maybe most leaders won't be open to at the beginning? What should they be open to in order to create a future city?
And most importantly, why should they be open to it?
Let's start with the why. It's always an important question. If you're not open to understand the changes, you will govern a bunch of old people. that eventually will die and fade away, and your city is going to collapse. So right now is the right time in order to stop thinking tactics and start thinking strategy on how to create a true sustainable model of an alpha city. And that model carries a lot of elements within it, from education to empathy to well-being to intelligence to creativity to economics to politics. All of these things are going to be digitalized at one time or another. But if you, as a leader of a city, can actually synchronize and strategize the way they're being digitalized, the way they're being augmented, you can really benefit the citizens of your city and really create or repurpose your current structures of the cities in favor of a city that will become a culture rather than a city. We tend to think about, many people in the world are talking about mega cities, but they're really irrelevant. It's the alpha cities that count. And that's why they need to do it. Otherwise, they are literally fucked. What do they need to do? They need to surround themselves with people that understand that artificial intelligence is not, I'll be back. It's much more than that. And robotic and genomic and biotechnology and neurotechnology and adjustable reality and the codifications of value interactions, these are and should be part of the decision-making elements within the day-to-day activities of the city. I would love to see every mayor in the world 1 day a week spending within a digital nomad think tank. Imagine that, right? And he doesn't decide the topics of the conversations. They do. And he's there to listen. And that 1 day a week is not going to destroy the city, but really, really benefit it. So that's a simple advice I can give to any mayor today. Make sure that you're constantly surrounded by digital nomads, because they're the only one that understand what does it mean to write life in code. Your old architects and transportation engineers and sewage engineers, they are brilliant people, but they are not writing in code. And like it or not, the future of society is written in code.
Aric, that's a great note to end on. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. That was really interesting.
My pleasure.
All right, that's it for that episode. Thanks for listening. If you want to get access to the show notes, go to futurethinkers.org/episode 32.
And again, I want to thank all of our supporters at patreon.com/futurethinkers for helping us make this show happen. You guys are super awesome human beings. We'll see you in the next episode. Bye!
Bye.